Our guest on Newsmakers this week is the junior senator from Utah, Mike Lee. Senator Lee is the author of a new book called Our Lost Constitution, and relevant committees for our conversation today are Judiciary and Armed Services. He's also on Joint Economic Committee. And right now in the city, there's a big debate over the reauthorization of the Patriot Act, and particularly a debate over the reauthorization of NSA surveillance. And Senator Lee is right in the middle of all that with the co-sponsor of his own legislation. Thank you for being here this week. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Let me introduce the two reporters who will be questioning him. Ellen Nakashima is Washington Post national security reporter, and Bob Cusack, editor-in-chief of The Hill. Thanks to both of you for returning. And Ellen, we're going to start with your questions.
Great. Thank you very much, Susan. As you know, it's been a big couple of weeks in the world of surveillance reform with last week the Federal Appeals Court in New York ruling that the NSA collection program that collects records of millions of Americans, phone records, is illegal and is not authorized by Section 215 of the Patriot Act. And then just a few days ago, the House voted by an overwhelming margin, 338 to 88, to end that NSA collection and replace it with a more modest form of collection that its sponsors, including you, say will protect national security at the same time as protect Americans' privacy. But at the same time, in the Senate, as you well know, the Senate is divided over this bill, and the majority leader, in fact, would like to see the NSA collection preserved and extended for another 5.5 years. And just in case that approach doesn't fly, he's got a proposal to reauthorize Section 215 for 2 months while Congress can debate what to do about it. So as an original co-sponsor of the bill and having seen this overwhelming vote in the House, do you think that vote compels the majority leader to bring your bill, USA Freedom, to the floor? And if he does, do you have the 60 votes needed to advance the bill to debate?
I'd very much like to see the USA Freedom bill, the same bill that was passed by the House of Representatives by this overwhelming majority of 338 to 88 earlier this week. I'd like to see it brought to the floor of the Senate and debated. If there are senators who have concerns with it, they can introduce amendments to try to make it better. But I'd like to see that be the point of discussion. The American people deserve to have this debated in open, and they deserve to have an open, robust debate, one that will hopefully get us to a point where we're not collecting all of the telephone data right now. You know, really the case before the Second Circuit focused on many of the same issues that the American people are concerned about, which is the method of collection. It's how they collect it. Instead of just going out and saying, send us all of your telephone data that's relevant to an investigation that we have before us in the NSA, they're instead saying, send us all of your data. Just send it all in, regardless of whether it's relevant. That's the problem with its authorization under Section 215, which the Second Circuit found inadequate. Mm-hmm. It's also the same concern that triggers a lot of privacy concerns on a lot of people. And the same thing that causes a lot of us to feel like it's at least in conflict with the spirit of the Fourth Amendment, if not the letter of the Fourth Amendment.
Right, and this was a program, in fact, that was launched in secret right after the 9/11 attacks by the Bush administration, and really came to public attention only with a leak by Edward Snowden. And I think one of the principles of the Supreme Court's, the Appeals Court decision was that a program of that magnitude really could not be created without more public debate and full congressional knowledge. So in fact, what do you think the effect of that Appeals Court decision is on, for instance, a straight reauthorization of Section 215 as Majority Leader McConnell would like?
I certainly think that a straight reauthorization of Section 215 in light of the Second Circuit's ruling would be risky, because the legality of the program has now been called into question in a way that is pretty prominent. To have one of our courts of appeals, just one step below the U.S. Supreme Court, saying that this is unlawful. And by the way, they didn't reach the question of constitutionality because they didn't have to, having concluded that it's not authorized by the statute. That creates enough uncertainty that we ought to just pass the USA Freedom Act. We know that the USA Freedom Act would work. We also know that it would be lawful and that it wouldn't run into the legal problems that were identified by the Second Circuit in that case. Moreover, Ellen, there's an additional point here, which is that it is very difficult to see a scenario in which you could get 218 votes in the House of Representatives to pass a clean reauthorization of Section 215, because this is, with good cause, a controversial thing among the American people. I actually talk about this issue quite a lot in my book, Our Lost Constitution. I tell the story of a man named John Wilkes, not to be confused with John Wilkes Booth, who was Lincoln's assassin, but John Wilkes, who was a member of Parliament, who found himself arrested by King George III in 1763. He fought a big battle against the use of general warrants, where the government would just go out and say, get us all the information that might be relevant to whatever we're looking into. His battle was ultimately victorious, and he became a hero on both sides of the Atlantic. His story and his struggle, which I describe in my book, ended up inspiring the Fourth Amendment. And the Fourth Amendment says that when warrants issue, they need to describe with particularity the places, the persons, the things to be searched.
Let me ask a legislative tactics question for just a minute. The majority leader is now proposing a short-term extension until the 31st of July because of this wide-ranging debate. I'm wondering, are you willing to support that short-term extension so that some of these contentious issues can find compromise?
I don't really have any interest in extending it, in kicking the can for a period of 2 months, especially given all the legal problems that are at play. What I would prefer is to have this bill, the one that was just passed by the House of Representatives, brought up on the Senate floor and debated and discussed. Now, if they need a few more days to do that, that's one thing. But to extend it for 2 months, I don't see any good reason to do that, and I see a lot of reasons not to do it.
Do you think that would have the votes or not, even a short term to end of July?
I'm not sure. That's difficult to say. I think it is definitely in doubt whether they would have the votes to do that, because again, so you had 338 members of the House of Representatives who voted for this bill, and this bill has as its principal object, its principal purpose, ending bulk data collection. So you had 338 who want to end bulk data collection. You have 88 who voted against the bill. Now, of the 88 who voted against the bill, you have a lot of members, Republicans and Democrats, who voted against it not because they like the status quo, not because they want to extend Section 215 of the Patriot Act and continue to authorize bulk data collection, but because they think it doesn't go far enough. They don't even like what is put in place by this one. So that's why I have some doubts about whether there are the votes present to extend Section 215 as is for 2 months.
Another topic, big news this week, George Stephanopoulos of ABC News. News came out that he had donated $75,000 to the Clinton Foundation. He has said he won't moderate upcoming primary debates. Do you think he should recuse himself from all 2016 political coverage?
It would make sense to me, both from George's perspective and from the perspective of ABC, to do that. Now, look, I have tremendous respect for George Stephanopoulos. I enjoy watching his show. I've enjoyed being interviewed by him in the past. He's very professional, and he's very interesting to watch. He makes for compelling TV. I like that. He is, however, someone who is a long-standing Clinton ally. He got his big start on the national stage with the Clinton administration. He has donated $75,000 over the last 3 years to the Clinton Foundation. And then recently, when he was interviewing Peter Schweitzer, he went after him, the author of Clinton Cash, went after him quite aggressively, almost like a prosecutor trying to build his case. Now, that's his prerogative, but I do think it calls into question whether or not he's going to be objective in approaching the 2016 presidential election cycle. ABC has got a lot of great reporters, and there are a lot of others who could cover this cycle very well without all of the, at least the appearance of an impaired objectivity. Jonathan Karl, for example, could cover it just fine. I would think that would make sense for ABC, but that's ABC's choice.
ABC has, as you know, has not gone that far. Stephanopoulos has apologized. Will this, if they don't go that far, will you go on ABC? Will you go on Stephanopoulos' show again?
My staff has advised me not to, but I'll have to make that decision as it arises. I'll consider each interview request as it comes. Again, this is a choice for ABC, but I would think that ABC would want to make sure that it does whatever it has to do within reason to make sure that it's perceived appropriately as an objective provider of news.
Can I get back to the NSA program for a minute here? Do you think you have the 60 votes to get to closure on that if McConnell brings this bill to the floor at this point.
If the leader brings
it to the floor.
USA Freedom Act to the floor. I can't tell you that we have 60 votes right now. In fact, I can't count to 60 right now. But I do think if we brought it to the floor, we had an open amendment process, we could quickly get to the point where we could get to 60 votes on something. I'm not sure what it would look like at the end of the day. It might have some modifications. But I think some variation of it could well pass by 60 votes. It's not a certainty, but few things are certain at the outset, which is why we need to bring it to the floor. What we do know is that this is what can pass the House.
Right.
Since it's what passed the House, we need to give it a shot in the Senate.
You say some variation. What do you think that might entail or include in order to get those 60 votes?
Well,
and could that then pass the House?
Yeah, I'm not sure I'm the best one to ask on this because I like the bill as is. I could support it as is. I do support it. I'm the Senate sponsor of the bill as is. I prefer to pass it just as it is now. But there are those who might want to see a different transition period, for example. They might, instead of seeing a 6-month transition period into the new system that doesn't rely on bulk collection, perhaps they might want to extend that out a little bit farther. But again, you probably have to ask those who have concerns with the bill, concerns that I don't share.
Well, Rand Paul is one of those who has concerns with the bill, and he's one of those who would actually like to repeal the Patriot Act altogether. If you get to 59 votes and he still at that point has not committed, do you think you get him to give you his vote as the 60th?
Oh, I'm sure going to try with Rand. Rand and I agree on a lot of things, and we both share the view that the bulk data collection program under Section 215 is wrong. And so I'm going to continue to lobby him every time I get the chance. Look, the big reason why he and so many others are concerned about reauthorizing the Patriot Act, I think by far the biggest reason, has to do with bulk data collection. That's what we're ending here, and I think we'd be better off as a result if we passed this bill.
Do you think that the White House should be doing more to back the legislation, but pushing the Senate to act on it quickly, because we're coming very close to the deadline?
Sure. I've appreciated the support we've gotten from the White House so far. I've appreciated the fact that James Clapper, the Director of National Intelligence, has expressed his support. I'm appreciative of the support we've gotten from the White House as well. The more any of them can do, the better. And the more they can do in particular to help us make the case to the American people that we will be safe under this system, that we will not be leaving NSA without the tools that it needs to keep Americans safe, the better off we're going to be.
Mm-hmm. You're up for re-election, and you beat a sitting incumbent. What is your relationship with Senator Hatch? You did not support, you did not endorse Senator Hatch in his last election. He hasn't yet endorsed you. You're from the same state. How do you guys work together?
We got along well. I've known him most of my life. We're good friends. He's someone that I've long admired and that I enjoy working with. It's generally my practice. I don't endorse incumbents. I haven't in the past endorsed incumbents in Senate races, and so that was nothing particular to him.
Do you expect a primary challenge? There has been talk of it.
Yeah, there has been talk of it, and so I'm preparing for it, preparing for the worst, hoping for the best.
You have legislation that's bipartisan on sentencing reform, and it would change how the U.S. deals with the drug sentencing. This is bipartisan. When is this going to move? Have you talked to Chairman Grassley about moving this legislation, and could it pass in this Congress?
I think it could pass in this Congress if it came up for a vote. I'm quite certain of it. We now have a majority of the members of the Senate Judiciary Committee who are supportive of it. Mm-hmm. Chairman Grassley has expressed some concerns with it, and so we're working with him and his staff to try to bring him along to try to resolve concerns he's got. It's important to emphasize the fact that this bill, the Smarter Sentencing Act, which I've introduced in the Senate with Dick Durbin as my lead co-sponsor, it does not end the use of minimum mandatory sentences in our federal system. It rather reforms them. It brings about some very common sense, step-by-step reforms that would make our federal criminal justice system more effective and efficient.
Mm-hmm. How has the events in Baltimore affected the debate in Washington over this issue?
You know, the events in Baltimore of late don't really relate directly to the Smarter Sentencing Act. But I think in time they may help contribute to an environment in which we can start asking some more questions about our criminal justice system. about whether or not it's doing what we want it to do, about what we're doing to communities. One of the things that I've emphasized over and over again in pitching the Smarter Sentencing Act is that this is not just about the fact that our federal prison population has exploded, that it's increased 800 or 900% since 1980. And it's not just about the financial costs of maintaining a federal prison system with that many prisoners. It's also about the human costs, about the neighborhoods, the communities, the families that are left without brothers and fathers and uncles. It's about the human costs that go into a system that relies too much on federal law in some cases, and within the arena of federal criminal law, sometimes relies on excessive minimum mandatory penalties. We still want judges to be able to throw people away for a long time if that's what's warranted in the particular case. And that's why we don't adjust any of the statutory maximum sentences. But we think in some cases involving nonviolent drug offenders that the minimum mandatory sentence might be placed too high.
We have 10 minutes left. Ellen?
Yeah, I wanted to ask you a little bit about Majority Leader McConnell and your thoughts on whether, if he cannot get votes for a reauthorization, whether it's 2 months or 4 months or five years, do you think he would let Section 215 and 2 other important intelligence authorities that are also expiring on June 1st, would he just let them expire?
I don't think so. I don't think he wants that to happen. I think he wants the NSA to continue to have the tools that are necessary to protect the American people, the tools to monitor things that might be happening that might signal a threat to the American people. And so I think he is working in good faith toward finding a solution that can get passed in the House and in the Senate while addressing many of the concerns that a lot of Americans have.
Do you think he has control over his caucus? Your caucus?
Well, the caucus certainly isn't united on the question, if that's what you mean. There are 5 or 6 of us who are where I am. There are a handful of others who seem to be leaning that way, but have yet to sign on to the bill as co-sponsors, but will probably be voting for it at the end of the day. So if that's what you mean by control of the caucus, not necessarily, but I think Republicans, there are more Republicans in the Senate right now that are more comfortable with his point of view than with mine.
Mm-hmm.
Senator McConnell tapped you as an advisor. I want you to, 2-part question. Assess the new Senate majority and assess the party in total. What is the party doing right? What does the party need to do a lot better?
First of all, I think the Senate is operating as the Senate is supposed to be operating, much more so than it has over the last 4 years, over the previous 4 years before the Republicans took control. We're voting a lot more now. Within just the first few weeks, we took more votes on the floor of the Senate than we had taken in the entire year in 2014. It's also important to note that we've passed a budget for the first time in 6 years. The last time we had a budget that got passed, there was no such thing as the iPad. This is significant because it's the passage of a budget that starts off the regular order appropriations process, and the hope is that we'll pass a dozen or so appropriations bills by government function that creates better government across the board. It allows for more itemized spending decisions, and it allows for more government oversight along the way. I think this is important, and I think the state of the party is good, and it can always get better. I would like to see the Republican Party in general moving in the direction of identifying the benefits of conservative policies on poor and middle-class Americans, on identifying the fact that we have something of an economic mobility crisis in America. It shows up at every level of the economy. It shows up in the form of immobility among the poor, insecurity in the middle class, and cronyist privilege at the top of the economy. We've got conservative policy proposals that would help address every level and would help promote economic mobility in America.
What's going to be the key to defeating the Democratic nominee for president, which is likely going to be Hillary Clinton?
Yeah, so I think it's far more about the policies and the agenda than it is the personalities. And I think whoever within our party can channel this feeling, which is that we can do better, we can help the poor get out of poverty, we can help the middle class to get ahead, if we'll start looking at things a little bit differently, if we'll stop looking at every problem from an angle that suggests that Washington, D.C. has all the problems, that more government is somehow going to be the solution. Whoever can channel that message and deliver a message of optimism and hope will, I think, get the nomination and have the best chance of being victorious in November of 2016.
But what do you think is Hillary Clinton's biggest weakness that the Republicans need to expose?
Well, she's part of an established system of government, part of a political legacy, you might say, that is not necessarily going to play as well for her as it might have if everything else were the same and we were a couple decades earlier. In other words, being in Washington, D.C. for a long time and having served in the United States Senate, having served as Secretary of State, is thought by many to be her greatest strength. If you look at this race on a resume basis, on who has accumulated the most impressive resume, in so many ways, Hillary Clinton's resume stands out. And yet, Washington, D.C. has become less popular. Congress has become less popular. And so in that respect, her resume may not be quite the strength that many are assuming it to be as we approach this election, because a lot of people are seeing that Washington has failed to deliver on a lot of its promises.
And which of the candidates that are in the ring, the Republican Party, do you think stands the best chance of defeating Hillary Clinton?
It's a little hard for me to be objective on this one, because probably my three closest allies and best friends in the Senate are all running for president. Rand Paul, Ted Cruz, and Marco Rubio are very, very dear friends of mine. They're also close legislative allies. I think the world of all three of them. I want to be as helpful to all three of them as I possibly can be. And I think any one of those three could end up doing well, could end up being our nominee, and could end up standing very well against whoever the Democratic candidate is. Among the others, I certainly think Scott Walker seems to be doing well and is getting a very good response where he's speaking. Jeb Bush has had a rough few days. We'll see where that one goes.
Senator, while we're talking about elective politics, you made some news with MSNBC this week suggesting that under a Republican administration you might welcome a Supreme Court appointment. I'm wondering, we should tell our viewers that you have a background in the judiciary. Your father was Solicitor General, you were Assistant U.S. Attorney, and you also clerked for now Justice Sam Alito. I'm wondering, though, that would pretty much take you out of a future bid for the presidency yourself if you went to the court. What are you thinking that you could accomplish in the courts that you couldn't in a Senate career? Well,
first of all, I want to make clear what I think I made clear in that interview as well, which is that I've got the job I want. I ran for the Senate. I like serving the Senate. I'm running for re-election. This is where I want to be. I think the context in which that quote came out was one in which after I had made that statement, they said, okay, come on, what would happen if one of your friends who's now running for president becomes president and then asked you to consider being nominated to that position? And I said, okay, well, in that circumstance, of course,
lots of hypotheticals there, right?
Yes, that's many, many hypotheticals deep, and so I'm focused on my work in the Senate and not on another job.
Okay, fair enough.
You mentioned Jeb Bush has had a rough few days, and he's fumbled on the Iraq war question. What do you think of Jeb Bush? Do you hear in Republican circles that there is Bush fatigue out there?
Oh yeah, certainly. That's a well-known fact that his last name might not be his greatest strength, and it's also something that a lot of people are saying, that if his last name were anything other than Bush, that he might have an easier time. And I think those who are saying that don't mean to denigrate either his brother, George W. Bush, or his father, George Herbert Walker Bush, or anything they did in office. I think it's just a simple recognition of the fact that a lot of people get squeamish when they think about nominating a third Bush within just a few decades to be the Republican candidate for president.
Final questions?
If I might, just on civil liberties and surveillance reform, what this debate has also shown is this interesting alliance between the civil libertarians and the libertarians, the Democrats and the Republicans, conservative Republicans like yourself, can come together and compromise on a bill, on a package of surveillance reforms. Still, there are some who say it doesn't go far enough, as like your friend Rand Paul. Do you think if you actually manage to get something like USA Freedom passed, is that the end for you, or do you think you can keep this coalition together and even growing to address other surveillance programs, which, as you know, are still causing some concerns, such as the Section 702 of the FISA Amendments Act, and as Ron Wyden would like to do, close the backdoor search loophole there, or the broader collection under executive orders 12333. Are those things that you would like to also address?
Yes, yes.
Will you?
And I want to be clear, this coalition isn't going anywhere. And you're absolutely right to point out that this is an issue that is neither distinctively Republican nor Democratic. It's neither conservative nor liberal. It's simply an American ideal. It's a constitutional ideal. That is, that there is such thing as privacy. Our privacy is protected by our Constitution. And the American people don't like a government that is too inclined to have sort of a brooding omnipresence. They want the government to stay out of their private business. They don't like the idea of a government that monitors who they're calling and who's calling them. Even if it's just data, from that data they can extrapolate a whole lot of information. Now, I'm willing to assume, for purposes of this discussion surrounding Section 215 of the Patriot Act, that the people working at NSA right now love this country and love the American people, don't want to abuse them. But who's to say that will always be the case? Who's to say that'll be the case a year from now, or 5 years from now, or 10 years from now? We've got to make sure that our intelligence gathering systems aren't used against the American people. Remember the Church Commission, just a few decades ago. I refer to this in my book, Our Lost Constitution. Refer to the fact that the Church Commission concluded in its report that every presidential administration, from FDR through Nixon, had used our nation's intelligence gathering systems to engage in political espionage. So in a sense, we've seen this movie before. We know how it ends, and we need to make sure the protections are in place so that our systems that are there to keep us safe aren't abused.
That's got to be our last word. Senator Lee, thank you for being our guest on Newsmakers this week.
Thank you.